It is. And when the water starts, when the waves start going like this to white capping, right? We know what white capping is. When that wind is kicking up so much that the waves start to come up and mist at the top, you know it's going to be bad. That's kind of what's going on here in this situation. There's no more gentle ripples. There's this white capping, foaming waves that are here. These men are experiencing a deluge of rain and wind, and this little fishing boat's in serious trouble. And when I read this, I thought, this is like the SS Minnow. You know what I'm saying? Gilligan's Island. This 3-hour tour is not going to go very well. But it's interesting. There's a little 4-word sentence that's said here, and it says, but Jesus was sleeping. Jesus was sleeping. Even in the fierceness of this storm, it is amazing that Jesus is sleeping in the boat. Here's a couple pictures I wanted to show you. This boat here on my left, I guess, it's your left too. You never know when you're looking back there. This boat here on the left is an actual boat. It's called the Jesus boat or the Galilean boat. And as the Sea of Galilee the water level has dropped because of irrigation and different stuff, this boat was revealed in the muddy banks of that. And they actually dug it out. And that is an actual boat from the time of Jesus. This boat here to the side is a little model of one made. So you can look at this boat and see it is not a huge boat. This isn't a Carnival cruise line here, all right? This isn't some big, massive ship here. This is some small thing, and the waves are sweeping over there. It wouldn't take long for all the water that's coming in that storm to start to make that boat ride lower and draft lower in the water. Have you ever slept through something tremendous? Like just slept right through it, and everyone goes, man, how did you know? I did. I was stationed in California in 1994, and many of you might remember this, but in 1994 there was what was called the Northridge earthquake. Do you remember that in California? Here's a picture of what went on there. You can see this bridge has collapsed here at 4:50 a.m. on January 17th, 1994. A 6.7 earthquake shook that valley right there, and I slept through the whole thing. I didn't even know anything was going on. I woke up and I was like, and I turned on the news, and all of a sudden I see all this stuff. I'm like, how did I miss it? Seriously, I could sleep through a train going right through my bedroom. In fact, our first little house that we lived in, the parsonage in Glencoe, no kidding, was probably like a half a mile from a railroad track where the train switched tracks. And I don't know if you've ever lived that close to a railroad track, but the whole ground shakes and rumbles when this mile-long train was coming, and so they would pass there. I'd sleep through that all the time. They blow their horn all the way through town. I'd just sleep right through all that stuff. That is Jesus. He is in this boat. The waves are crashing. This thing is rocking, and I don't know if he's snoring, but if he is, I'm sure he was snoring to holy, holy, holy. I think he was snoring to a hymn. I don't know. That might be sacrilegious to some of you. I'm sorry. But he was in here. In the midst of all of this, Jesus finds himself asleep. And look what happens in verse 25. Here's a picture of it, of a rendition of an artist showing Jesus sleeping there in the front of the boat. But it says this: the disciples went and woke him. And they said, Lord, save us. We're going to drown. These experienced fishermen are scared. They're fearful of dying, and they wake Jesus up, and they plead with him to save them. Larry Kennard says this at this point in his commentary. He says, the address and petition of the disciples takes on a prayer-like quality. It's almost like the last-ditch effort when we say, please, pray, do something. We're about ready to die. And that's how these disciples were. Here Jesus is, their teacher, their master, the one they're following, and he's asleep, and they're like, do something. Do you see what is happening? Nothing makes us more of a believer than when the supernatural strikes and we are in the throes of death. Suddenly, everyone's a believer then. Oh God, right before they crash. Lord, help us, right before they go under. Jesus, they just cry out when there's no way out. It's interesting how the throes of death suddenly bring us face to face with the reality of a Creator God who loves us and who I think we instinctively know is there, but we turn our back on him so much. Look what happens in verse 26. It says that he replied, you of little faith, why are you so afraid? Then he got up and he rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. Now, you just want to see him, the boat's moving around or whatever, and they're like, oh, wake up, and then, hey, stop. And it just falls completely silent and calm and still. Why does Jesus say to these men, you of little faith? They saw the boat taking on water. They saw the storm was fierce. It seemed only natural to me, as it probably does to you, for someone to be afraid of drowning and say, hey, do something. I'm afraid. But Jesus must have seen something that they didn't, and maybe that we don't either. So let's ask this question. What reason did the disciples have to believe that Jesus was with them and that they were safe? Well, when you look back just a few chapters here in Matthew, you see there's several things that are going on. Just a few chapters earlier, they heard that Matthew, as Matthew records it, Jesus was teaching on the Mount, right? Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Blessed, he goes through the Beatitudes, blessed are those, and goes through all that stuff. He talks about all kinds of different things. They see someone who's strong and tenacious. They see someone who teaches like no one else has ever taught before. There was something different about him. And then they watched him heal a man with leprosy. I mean, that was a death sentence in that day, to have leprosy. No one wanted to touch you. You had to stay a far distance away. If you got close to someone, you had to call out, unclean, unclean, so that they would stay away from you. Jesus doesn't worry about that. He goes up, he touches them. Everyone knew that meant you were infected by it, but not Jesus. In fact, he heals the individual. They heard Jesus pronounce to the centurion just a few verses earlier that his servant would be healed, right? He says, I'm a man under authority. You're a man under authority. Just give the command. I know my servant will be healed. Jesus says, there's no one that has this kind of faith in all of Israel. Your servant will be well. He doesn't even go to the house. And the Bible tells us at that moment that the servant was healed. And then we see a little bit later on, he goes in and he heals Peter's mother-in-law. I'm wondering if Peter was praying for or against. I don't really know, but I mean, he goes in there. He goes in there and he heals Peter's mother-in-law. And there were various other people that he healed by just speaking a single word. So they had good reason to believe that Jesus was more than just a man, that he was full of the power of God because they had just seen it over and over and over again. Yet even though he was with them, they did not trust that Jesus could protect them. They don't understand that the power of God is sitting in the boat with them, but their life experience, the harshness of the storm, which they probably had already gone through once before, I'm sure, and they concluded death is now imminent. Even though I have this powerful man Jesus with me, I've been on the sea enough times, I don't think he can save me. Have you ever been in that boat? Even though Jesus is with you, you go, yeah, but I live life, and I had this experience, and I know that you can't solve this problem. I know you can't put this marriage back together. I know you can't handle this problem at my work. I know you can't bring this wayward child back to God. I know you can't do that. I know you can't. I know you can't. And I know all that because I've been down the school of hard knocks. Now, you might not say that to God, but you probably think it. These men are in the same boat. Let's pause for a moment here then and lift this story to our day and our lives today. Can we relate to what's going on here? How many of us have experienced a sudden storm in life? How many of you just experienced that? You went to work that day, everything was fine, and wham, something happened out of the blue. A pain suddenly developed. You're like, you haven't felt this pain forever, but now this pain is so great, you find yourself off to the emergency room, and all of a sudden life is just spinning out of control. You're driving to work one day, and all of a sudden someone T-bones you. Next thing you know, you wake up and there's all these bright lights in your eyes. You're in the ER. You come home one day, there's a letter that says, I just don't want to be married to you anymore. I knew a preacher like that one time. In the little church that we were in Jacksonville, North Carolina. I felt so sorry for him because he just came home one day and his wife just said, I don't want to be married to a preacher. Just left him. We just hired him. That stuff happens. This stuff happens, and all of a sudden, life, this sudden thing just takes us by storm. You wake up one day, everything that was normal suddenly is not normal anymore. And you find yourself bailing water out of the boat. You find yourself pulling the sails down, trying to stay afloat. You find yourself battening down everything, and the boat is beating you, so to speak, and you feel like you're about ready to capsize in the sudden storm that has taken you on. And sometimes you probably feel like God is asleep. You ever been there? Or if he's not asleep, he just ain't worried. And you're worrying yourself to death. In one of our readings this week I posted about on Facebook expressed this very feeling. David said this in Psalm 10 when he said, "Why, O Lord, do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble?" You know, when I read passages like that, it warms my heart. Because I know that what I'm feeling and what I'm going through from time to time, that someone like David, who was a man after God's own heart, who struck down the giant, who struck the lion and the bear, saving his sheep from, or his father's sheep and all those different things. There were times when David said, "God, why are you so far off? When I find myself in times of trouble, it's like I cannot find you. You're hidden." And yet as Christians, with the indwelling Holy Spirit, we know that Jesus is with us in the boat, so to speak, do we not? I mean, the Bible tells us in Acts 2:38 that when we believe and are baptized, we receive the gift of the Holy Spirit, the Comforter, the one who's to be with us, the down payment of salvation and the inheritance to come and all of that. Look at the scriptures that support this idea. In 1 John chapter 4 and verse 16, it says, "And we know and rely on the love God has for us. God is love, and whoever lives in love lives in God, and what? God in him." And in Psalm 23, verse 4, it says, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." What? "For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." That was David speaking there. Back into John 14:16, it says, "And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another counselor" to what? "To be with you forever." And in Matthew 28:20, it says, "And teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you, and surely I am" what? "With you always to the very end of the age." You can go through verse after verse after verse and show where God is saying, "I will be with you," or Jesus is reassuring his disciples, "I will be with you." And I do think that some of those promises are for us as believers in the church today. So if we have Jesus in the boat with us, so to speak, then why do we, like the disciples then, worry so much about the sudden storms of life that come upon us? Let's look at the text here to find the answer. In verse 27, it says this: "The men were amazed and asked, 'What kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him.'" We have fear and anxiety and worry, even though Jesus is in the boat with us, because we have not recognized just who it is that is with us. They asked the question, "What kind of man is this?" Their understanding of Jesus was still in human terms, which is interesting because they had seen so many things. Their understanding didn't go beyond that. To them, he was just a man like they were. And he is a man like they were. He is a human being like you and I are. But he is so much more than that. Jesus did not give up all of his nature of God when he came to earth. Paul tells us he gave up his equality, means the equalness that he had with God in heaven. He does empty himself of some things, but not of all things. He still retained the ability to heal diseases and to restore the broken. Right? I don't know when the last time you touched someone and healed them or commanded a word and someone was made well. I know we live in a world today where people claim to have done that. I don't think that that's biblical. But I do think that God can heal. But we know that Jesus healed. He touched them and it healed them, made them well. Instantly, complete, ongoing. He spoke words and it changed things. The mere speaking of words commanded actions of healing. And the withering of the fig tree that we're going to read later, right? And he said, "Hey, you haven't produced any fruit. Bad." Right? He denied the laws of nature when he walked on the water. We're going to read about that. He stepped outside of the carnal world for a moment and was transfigured into this more glorious state on the mountain before the very eyes of Peter, James, and John, the inner three. And they not only saw him, but they saw Moses and Elijah as well. He commanded demons to come out of the possessed. He said, "Hey, come out. Stop. Don't speak." He multiplied loaves of bread and a few fish and fed thousands of people, at least twice recorded in the Gospels. He raised the dead with the command of "Come out" or "Arise." And the simple touch of his garment healed a woman who had been dealing with a blood order for years. He confounded the wise and he brought low the prideful. When you look at all these things, you see that the man in the boat is not just a man. He's not just a rabbi. He's not just a good teacher, a wise sage, a man of compassion, a man of enlightenment, or just some other prophet of God. He is God. God in the flesh, which is why we call him the incarnate Jesus. the God saves that puts on flesh. He is the God who put on flesh to live among us, to show us who He is and how He loves us. He is the God that stands in the fiery furnace with us. He is the God that joins us in the lion's den so that we are not afraid. He is the God that speaks from the burning bush and lets us know that He is real. He is the God that is beside us when we stand before rulers of this world, like with the Apostle Paul. He is the one who promised those who had no children that they would bear children. He's the one who would come to our aid when the city is surrounded by the enemy. He is the one who hears the cries of the brokenhearted, who remembers the one who is righteous, who finds favor in His servants, who touches the leper and calls out the outcasted people. He's the one who gives grace to the person caught in adultery, who adopts the orphan who has no family, who brings comfort to the widow. He releases captives and He calls us by name. He is the God who is in the boat with us when the storm of life is suddenly upon us. That is who He is. So next time the winds kick up, and next time the waves begin to break over the bow, take notice that God is with you. That God is with you. He is not fearful of your storm, for He has the ability to calm it with a single word. Now, whether He will or not is up to Him and the sovereignty of His decision, but we can trust in Him. That is why the Apostle Paul said this in Romans 8. He says, "What then shall we say in response to this? If God is for us, then who can be against us?" What kind of man is this? He is Jesus Christ, Yeshua Christos. God saves the Messiah. Who is the man that's in the boat with you? He's the Lord of heaven and earth. So when you find yourself in the boat,